I'm Robert Barber. Welcome to Fragments. Just me, a microphone, and an interesting story that I couldn't stop thinking about. Some of these are forgotten newspaper accounts. Some are old legends. Some are bits of folklore that have survived for generations. They're not full documentaries. They're simply stories that deserve another telling. I've been fortunate enough to spend time on North Carolina's Outer Banks over the years, and it's become one of my favorite places to visit. It's beautiful, but it's also one of those places where history never feels very close to being finished. Every lighthouse, every inlet, and every quiet stretch of shoreline seems to have another story attached to it. There was one story I kept thinking about every time I visited, not because of who Blackbeard was, but because of what people believed he left behind. So, let's tell one. Have you ever been somewhere that seemed to remember what happened there? Nothing may look unusual, but once you know the story connected to a road, a house, or a stretch of shoreline, the place can feel different. There's a place like that near Ocracoke Island, a quiet barrier island along North Carolina's Outer Banks. Today the water's calm. Fishing boats pass through the inlet. Pelicans skim low across the surface, and visitors stop to watch the sun disappear beyond the sound. If you didn't know the story, there would be little reason to think anything remarkable had ever happened there. But on November 22nd, 1718, those waters became the setting for Blackbeard's final battle. The man we remember as Blackbeard was almost certainly named Edward. His surname or his last name appears in old records with several different spellings, though Teach is the version most historians accept. In the end, it hardly mattered. The name everyone remembered was Blackbeard. And honestly, that name did a lot of work for him. By the early 1700s, merchant ships sailing the Atlantic coast dreaded running into him. Blackbeard wasn't just stealing cargo. He'd built a reputation for violence that often convinced crews to surrender before a fight even started. Sometimes fear was more valuable than cannon fire. Blackbeard was described as tall, heavily armed, and wearing his dark beard long. One early account said that during battle he took slow-burning fuses beneath his hat so smoke curled around his face. Now, it's difficult to know how often he actually did that, but whether he used that trick often or only a handful of times almost doesn't matter. If your goal was to convince people that they were facing something larger than life, it certainly worked. By the end of 1718, Blackbeard had become one of the greatest threats to shipping along the American coast. Virginia's governor finally decided enough was enough. Lieutenant Robert Maynard was sent south with 2 small vessels and a crew of armed sailors to find him. They found Blackbeard anchored near Ocracoke Island, where the shallow coastal waters gave him a natural advantage over larger naval ships. The waters around the island weren't open ocean. They were a maze of narrow channels, shifting sandbars, and shallow inlets that larger naval ships struggled to navigate. Blackbeard knew those waters. Maynard knew he had to follow him into them. The first shots echoed across the inlet as the 2 sides exchanged cannon fire. Smoke drifted across the water. Several of Maynard's men were killed or wounded before the vessels finally came together. Blackbeard and the men still fighting beside him boarded Maynard's vessel, expecting to overwhelm the small crew waiting on deck. Instead, the sailors Maynard had concealed below deck rushed up to meet them. The fight became a desperate struggle at arm's length. Pistols fired, swords clashed. Men grabbed whatever they could reach, and when it was over, Blackbeard lay dead on the deck. One early account said his body had been struck by 5 gunshots and roughly 20 cuts. Whatever the exact number, He had taken an extraordinary amount of punishment before he finally fell. The smoke cleared and the shouting stopped. The battle was over. Maynard ordered Blackbeard's head removed. It was fastened to the bow of his vessel and carried back toward Virginia as proof that the pirate was dead. His body was thrown overboard in the waters near Ocracoke. That was the part people couldn't seem to leave behind. Blackbeard's head was carried away from the island. His body disappeared beneath the waters of what's now called Teach's Hole, a small channel that still bears his name. There was no grave, no marked resting place, no record that the head and body ever came back together. For Maynard, removing the head proved the expedition had succeeded. For the people who continued living around Ocracoke, it left behind a story that never quite seemed finished. Years passed. Life around the island moved on. Fishing boats crossed the inlet. Storms came and went. Generations grew up hearing about the battle that had taken place offshore. And then people began talking about seeing something near Teach's Hole after dark. Some described the shape of a man moving near the shoreline. From a distance, there seemed to be something missing above the shoulders. Other people remember something even stranger, a small light. Not like the steady lantern of a fishing boat working the sound, not a campfire along the shore, just a single light moving quietly across the dark water where Blackbeard's body had disappeared. Sometimes it appeared almost perfectly still. Other nights it drifted slowly across the inlet before fading back into the darkness. No one could point to the boat that should have been carrying it. People eventually gave it a name, Teach's Light. Over time, the stories began to belong together. The headless figure, the wandering light, the place where Blackbeard's body disappeared. People said he was still searching those waters for the head that had been carried away. The legend continued to grow. Some claimed Blackbeard's body circled Maynard's ship 3 times before sinking beneath the waves. Others believed a voice could sometimes be heard near the shoreline calling for the missing head. Honestly, the story never needed those additions for me. One of the most feared pirates in history died in those waters. His head was carried away as proof that he was gone. His body disappeared beneath the inlet where local people still had to make a living every day. Everything else grew from that unfinished ending. More than 300 years have passed since the Battle of Ocracoke. The ships are gone. The men who fought there are gone. Teach's Hole is quiet again. People fish there. Boats pass through. Visitors stop to admire the view. And if you didn't know the story, you might never think twice about that stretch of water. But once someone tells you what happened there, it's hard to look at it the same way. Maybe some places really do seem to remember what happened there. Or maybe, once someone tells you to watch for a light on the water, it's hard not to look. Well, that's another fragment. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I'd love to hear what you thought. You can leave a comment on Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, or Threads. You can find me there at State of the Unknown Podcast. I'll be back next Tuesday with another full episode of State of the Unknown. And in 2 weeks, we'll sit down again for another fragment. Until next time, thanks for letting me tell you a story.